and thank you very much for staying for our post-play discussion. As you know, this is entitled The Glass Ceiling Under the Microscope, and by all means, if you are sitting up the back and would like to come closer to the discussion, please feel most welcome. My name is Therese Selden, and I'm the head of Young Women in Bio. We are the Seattle chapter's broader division of Women in Bio. We're an organisation dedicated to the advancement of women in the sciences. It's my sincere pleasure to be invited here today by the Institute of Systems Biology and the Seattle Repertory Theater to participate in what was a very compelling and thought-provoking piece of theatre. If you do have the opportunity, I would invite you to take a look at the foyer display, and what you'll see is that the story is much bigger than that of Rosalind Franklin, and there are many impressive scientists, both male and female, that we can highlight, and many female scientists in particular that we're going to focus on today that truly have an interesting life path and have made truly momentous discoveries. The women in that foyer display, and Rosalind Franklin indeed herself, really represent millions of talented, innovative and dedicated researchers and science professionals, and they all work towards creating the scientific discoveries of today that lead to the technologies that groundbreak tomorrow. Our panel discussion today will be talking about the advancement of women in science, and the impressive panel members will be introduced to you momentarily, but I first wanted to take just a quick moment to introduce our panel moderator, Dr. Leroy Hood. Now, for everyone in the audience, I'm sure Seattle's father of biotechnology needs no introduction. However, I wanted to highlight his contributions to encouraging girls and women in the life sciences and broader biotechnology and science space. Leroy Hood has definitely encouraged women both in the hiring and promoting of women in his own institute, the ISB, and is our most distinguished panel moderator today. So I'll hand off to Lee now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear okay? Okay. So the agenda is as follows. I'll give some brief comments about setting kind of the context for the upcoming discussion. I'll introduce the panel, then I'll ask a few questions of the panel, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So let me give you some facts that you may not know. Women have won 16 Nobel Prizes, 2 in physics, 4 in chemistry, and 10 in medicine and physiology. And I think the really interesting question, if we think about disparities of opportunities, of course, is the whole question of nature versus nurture. And of course, I think one of those answers has been settled. Maybe you're familiar with the fact that Larry Summers' presidency at Harvard ended when he made some utterly inappropriate comments about women not having the right kind of genes to be academic. So the real question is, if this disparity arises from the environment, what is the nature of those environmental influences? And I think there are 3 really important ones. One is the family. I've known a number of really exceptional women scientists, and I've been struck in each case how their family, and often their father, encouraged them and pushed them. So one of the interesting questions is, how can we encourage families to encourage their daughters in science? And that is a topic we may cover later on. I think the second area is in K through 12 science. And once again, this is an area where encouragement is absolutely critical. I remember when we started a program for elementary school in the entire Seattle school district. And after about a year, we went to a celebration at a school that was 95% African Americans. And I remember talking with 4 young girls in the 4th grade about what they wanted to do in the future. And 3 out of the 4 said they wanted to be scientists because science was fun. And that's the kind of influence that properly done K through 12 education can have. And of course, the interesting question is, how do we do it properly? And then finally, I'd say the science hierarchy. So in science, usually when you go to college, you decide to major in a science, and you can go on and do a PhD and a postdoc. And if you're lucky, you can become a faculty member and then go into scientific administration. And as with all administrative structures, there is enormous conservatism, and how you change these things, I think, is absolutely an incredible challenge. And yet, we obviously have to be able to change these things. What's interesting is if you think about minorities, I think all of these arguments apply to them as well. And in fact, I think a really interesting point is, I'm not sure there are any fundamental differences in the disparities that exist for minorities, and in many ways the disparities that exist for people. And I think the really critical point in any environment is that people have the opportunity to develop to the fullest of their capacities and to search out those opportunities that are most consistent with their own skills. And what I'm really struck with is, I think in the future, the countries that are going to be most effective are those who can efficiently use the skills and talents of all their citizens. And that's why I think in the long run, the Muslim terrorists are absolutely going to lose out. They've disenfranchised half of their populations. But we have to make sure we've enfranchised fully 100%. So I think the key question is not whether we're changing opportunities for women. I think we are. When I was a graduate student in the 60s, one person out of my class was a woman. And I would say in most biology graduate programs today, women may even dominate, and I think the same is true of medical school. And of course, where we're failing is at the higher levels of the hierarchy, at the faculty level, and at the administrative level. So I think the question is not, are we changing? I think we are, but slowly. I think the really critical question is how we accelerate these changes and what actions we have to take. So I think with that as an introduction, I will introduce the panel members. And on my right here, Philip Thurtle is Director of Comparative History of Ideas Program, Adjunct Professor of History, Adjunct Associate Professor of Anthropology, a long list of titles. And he's the author of an absolutely fascinating sounding book, The Emergence of Genetic Rationality, Space, Time, and Information in American Biology from 1870 to 1920. And then to my immediate right is Anna Karlin, Microscope Professor of Computer Science and Engineering. She got a PhD from Stanford before coming to the University of Washington. And her research is primarily focused on theoretical computer science, the design of and analysis of algorithms and so forth. And then to my immediate left is Kalliopi Trachana, who is a postdoc in my lab. She's interested in cellular mechanisms of cardiovascular disease. She got her early degrees in Greece, where she grew up, and then she got a PhD at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. And as she said, she vehemently supports the empowerment and advancement of women in science. And I can attest to that. So anyway, with that, let me throw to the panel the first question, and why don't we just go from my right to my left. So from your experience, do you think what happened to Rosalind Franklin still happens in research today, and why? Have you personally experienced discrimination in the scientific workplace? what advice would you give young women facing a situation similar to Rosalind's?
Thank you, Leroy. I really liked how you started off, pointing out to the number of different issues, the number of different influences that go into, factors that go into, perhaps, limiting women's role in science, especially at the upper levels of science, the scientific positions. I'd like to also point out that not all sciences are the same either, in how they support women. Biology and medicine tends to be much better with computer science and physics actually being some of the worst in how they support women's careers. And so with that understood, we may not see some of the interactions that Rosalind Franklin had. We may or may not. But at the same time, we still see, I think, very large systemic barriers, even in the biological sciences and in medicine. There are beginning to be many more females now in women working in biology, but at the same time, there's still a big drop that happens in undergraduate education. So something happens. We're getting a little bit better at supporting K through 12, but something happens in undergraduate education, and I think it has something to do with the way we perhaps teach the sciences, where the science ends up becoming a detailed type pursuit, and a pursuit of knowledge, and it gets driven away from the big questions that the people in humanities ask, that it really needs to be reunited with again. I think that could actually help.
So I have to disagree slightly with what you said about computer science teachers. The numbers are very bad in computer science. At the undergraduate level, for example, it's about 15% women. But I think we're vehemently trying to get a lot more women into the field, and I think trying to make somebody disagree. Trying to make it, as appealing as possible. And I just have to say that, I personally have virtually never experienced discrimination. I think partially it's because it's a young field. I mean, the people in the field are very young, and that really changes the attitudes. I think it's also true, though, that discrimination nowadays is much more subtle than what we saw in the play, and that makes it much more difficult to deal with. But my advice to young people going into the field, which is actually something the play, I think, really did a great job of pointing out, is the value of collaboration. I think finding people that you trust and respect and like to work with and bounce your ideas off of them is crucial to success and just making progress. So I just say avoid environments that are not supportive and collaborative, and life will be much better. Helen.
Yes. So I have a few points actually with the comments you did and Marie said before. First of all, I want to say that indeed there are 16 women Nobel laureates, and the first one in chemistry was Marie Curie in 1903. So that means it's not really female-male discrimination it was there. And actually the Nobel Prize of Economics was given first time in a woman, 2009. So we are a little bit better, I think, in STEM science, regarding this. So I remember my professor, he was like 70 years old when I joined the biochemistry department in Greece. He came in, he started counting females and males, and he was like, why there are so many women inside here? Yes, and I think it was a picture how it was a few decades ago in the universities and how it is right now, that women can get the same opportunity for education, and as Anna said, then it's harder to see a discrimination because it's more subtle. It's different nowadays. We can see equally in the undergraduate level male and females be represented. I think the problem starts in later, as we pointed out, when a woman be a professor or get a managerial position. And I think this is actually the way we grow up. I think, is the family, is the education, as Lee said, is the social norms that at the point woman has to decide if I should have a high-power career or just stay home, take care of my family. And I think there should be improvements in this area in order to see women taking place in higher positions. Yeah.
Okay, second question, and I think this is really an interesting one. Young researchers, both male and female, often face some problems that were really brought to the fore in the play, such as gaining recognition from their discoveries. When does a discovery become yours? That is, distinct from the ideas and discovery of your supervisor. And what can young researchers do to ensure credit is given fairly?
Same routine? Okay.
It worked.
I agree, that's a fascinating question, and it's in the history of science is actually riddled with accounts where people have said exactly the same things about what they were able to contribute when, but yet have disagreed about what was the important component that was contributed. You know, what was that moment, that tipping point that allowed for this to be able to say, okay, this is my creation, in a sense. And some of that, there's lots of different ways you can approach that, right? One of them is about intellectual property issues in the relationship with science. It's also about how forms of recognition are distributed in science, I think. And it really comes down to at what level, and this is where it's very personal, I think, with Rosalind Franklin, how can you, with these types of restrictions in place and these types of priorities around, how can you promote collaborations among sciences?
Well, I think as far as when a discovery is yours, I think it's virtually impossible to say. And although, so I think, but on the other hand, I want to emphasize that there's almost never a discovery that's purely yours. Pretty much everything is done in collaboration, and there's so many little pieces that go into every great result, as we saw so beautifully in the play, that, I think that's something one shouldn't worry about too much. And I think it's important and valuable for people to be generous with credit. Unfortunately, science is full of people with big egos that aren't necessarily focused on that, but I think that's something that's important. So my advice to my students is just to work with decent, honest, supportive people and just do the very best work they can and let everything else just fall as it may.
Yeah, more or less I don't want to add anything. I believe that if you're passionate about something, if you want to do something and you do the best out of it, usually it's recognized. And I think also from the play it was clear. She got the recognition she had to do. And sometimes I hear, yes, but she didn't get the Nobel Prize, but this is very, very often what you can hear about this case. But the truth is, usually the Nobel Prize never is given to people that have passed out, so we don't know if this would be the case. And I think just work hard and then everything is coming. Yeah.
Okay, the next question. Why are the sciences so often perceived as unattainable or just not for me? The sciences are academically rigorous, but do we offer the complementary educational support systems that are really necessary to foster excitement and a personal commitment to science?
Yeah, this is what I was touching on a little bit earlier. I think we do a great job training scientists at the graduate level. We do less of a great job at getting people excited about science at the undergraduate level. We tend to want the University of Washington, we put them in big classes, huge classes, and we tend to use textbooks, we tend to make it very much a knowledge received type of experience, when working in a scientific laboratory reflects very little of those types of skills. And this is one of the things I think we can do much better, is getting the sciences and the humanities speaking together again about yes, this is a really interesting concept you have here. How does it speak on bigger issues of life, right? Or much like what we saw with the play today, we got a very interesting scientific background story that happened, and yet at the same time it branched into all these other interesting directions that are often in the bailiwick of the humanities, such as the roles of inequities in society, who gets credit, and what is the meaning of life. You know, this is the substance of the humanities.
Well, I guess really regarding the question of why do so many girls view this as unattainable, I mean, I will reemphasize something Lee said, which is expectations. It's all about, if you're not expected to succeed, you won't succeed, typically. Another thing is, of course, stereotypes that boys are better than girls at these things persist, and that affects girls' self-confidence. There's also this thing about that you're naturally good at these things, and if you're not like a math genius right off the bat, then obviously you can't do math, which is completely absurd. I mean, you wouldn't apply that kind of thinking to learning to play an instrument or something. You understand that you have the potential for growth through work, and that's something we need to get across to our girls. And then there's the problem that girls systematically self-assess lower than they actually are, poorer than they're actually doing. I mean, there's a lot of studies that show this. If you ask what boys and girls or men and women that are doing the same in a science class or math class, how they're doing, the boys will self-assess that they're doing better than they are, and the girls will self-assess that they're doing worse than they are. And then, you know, when the girl sees the boy come out of the test and he says, oh, that's so easy, and it was hard for them, they think, okay, this is just not for me, I can't make it here. And so we need to help girls understand that that's just the way they talk.
Karlin?
Yeah, I mean, great points, both of them. I totally agree that then it goes back to social norms, family education, and everything is still we should push women to speak out and speak loudly and believe in themselves. I think this is the most important thing. But also, I think the first point about education, that this generation changes. I think we will see more and more young people going into science these days, because it's a time that really technology is part of our lives, and we believe it can improve our lives. So I think the next decades we will see more people, both boys and girls, going into STEM science. This is what I believe.
The audience should get ready. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem announced in 2012 the Gender Equality in Academia Act to recognize the equal potential of women and men and the importance of diversity in every creative community. What measures need to be taken by scientific institutions to achieve gender equality? How do you envision the correction of gender inequality in American academic institutions?
Wow, that's a big question. I would like for us to actually think about these mechanisms in two ways. We were given a nice top-down mechanism about mandating certain forms of equality. I also want us to pay attention, though, to some of what we've already heard about what's actually been working in the lives of women scientists, and that's some more of the bottom-up type of work that happens through people associating with each other and creating certain types of more informal networks that happen as well. So I think you actually have to keep doing both, frankly.
Well, it's very tough. I think that, I'll just tell you some of the things we're doing in my own department to try to correct this. One thing is we're trying to understand our own biases and overcome them, because it's very clear that, you know, studies show that even those of us who think we are totally unbiased, when we see a man and a woman with the same record, we will judge the man as better than the woman, typically. I mean, so there are a lot of studies to that effect. So I'm sure that even a person who is working hard to correct this will suffer from this. And so just awareness helps. The other thing is that we trying very hard in my department to, when it comes to diversity, we don't want to compromise on quality in any way. That's bad for everyone. But we will compromise on area. We're looking for somebody in a particular area, but if there's a superstar woman or a more diverse candidate in some way that's working in an area that we are already pretty good in, we don't have a super strong need, we want to increase the numbers, we'll just go for it. So I think it's important not to compromise on quality, but important to really reach out and just try to do what you can to increase the numbers.
Well, first of all, I was very, I will take it a little bit more, I'd say, simple things like maternal leaving. I will again talk about the family and how easy it is to help the professional development of a woman if she knows that she has the help from an institute or the state, the country, to also have both features, both a good career and also be a mother. And for example, in Europe, things are a little bit different than this in States. So there is laws in place, and moreover, there is both maternal and paternal leaving that is, let's say, people can take without losing their jobs. In States, this is not the case. So I think it's increased the competition in a way. And I agree with Anna that there is this tendency that if you have two candidates, female and male, usually you're thinking all these kind of things. I think about family. So I think this should come not only in the institutional level, but also in the governmental level. And I like the example with the Israel, for example, the Israel example, because look, in general, the things are a little bit different than it is in the US. Here you can see more women participate. There are many countries in this world that this is not the case. There's not equal education. There are bigger, stronger social norms. So I think things are better here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So shall we begin questions over here?
Hi, I'm a high school student who is considering pursuing sciences for a career. It seems to me as though not as many women are going into careers involving sciences, mathematics, engineering. From your experience, do you find that to be true as well? And if so, how do you suggest that we as a society can encourage young women, such as myself, to pursue careers like biotechnology?
Shall we do it the same way
We're
again?
going to do it the same way. This means I never get to respond to anybody.
Next question, we'll start at the end.
Oh, okay. Again, this is where the point I was trying to make about the differences between the sciences is very strong. Where math and physics and computer science, the numbers of women tend to be much lower than they are with the biological sciences. And that doesn't mean that we still don't need to encourage. And for someone of your age, one of the biggest encouragements that needs to happen is that you can do this. You can become a scientist and still achieve other goals in your life that you want to achieve as well.
Yeah, I guess I just can't emphasize that point enough. And I think we've discussed a lot of factors that play into why girls might not believe they can do it, that we have to overcome. And I guess, of course, great teachers who help students see the beauty and mystery and poetry in science. And then as well, just making sure that girls are aware of the incredible array of opportunities. I mean, they don't really want to forego. I mean, it's just unbelievable the possibilities, I think, especially in my field.
Cal?
No, you don't want to comment?
I think I'm neutral on these things.
Okay, I see. Just go for it. I mean, this is what I'm saying. If you are passionate about something, there is no one can tell you, don't do this or do that. Find I think, as Anna said, as we stressed out a lot, that just find what you're more passionate and find the help from your teacher and move on.
So I will add one comment. I really want to emphasize, I think one of the most important things parents can do is raise expectations in their children that they can do science. And that's true of men and women. I think these expectations really set the whole cycle for what a person is going to become. So as parents, you play an absolutely critical and determinative role in which directions your kids go. Okay, other questions? Yes. So can you stand up and speak loudly so we won't have to repeat every question?
Okay. First I want to say that I am not a scientist by training. I am by training and experience a humanist. All right? So when I consider this question, I consider the larger question. What concerns me about your discussion is that you're putting all the blame on society and on parents and the scientific community, whereas, okay, the woman has to take some responsibility, for, as I see it, for her career in science. Now, to this end, I allude to Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, his line, "Why can't a woman be more like a man?" And and follow that up by my response to the play. After all, we just saw a play. And how did the playwright develop this character? As I saw the main character, she had a chip on her shoulder. Science is a collaborative effort. She was not collaborative. She started out assuming, okay, she wasn't going to be accepted. She didn't accept any, or she didn't encourage any overtures from her male colleagues at the King College. Okay, and she didn't have balance in her life, which is a theme, I think, of the playwright, which she certainly had, which I believe she had an epiphany by the end of the play before she died at the tragically young age of 37. So I think that when we talk about this, okay, it's not only the culture or the society or the culturization, okay? Why can't a woman be raised, not necessarily to be a scientist, okay, but to be a woman and expect that she could be respected in the workplace as a scientist if she doesn't act like a man? And that she was costumed in the beginning in a masculine type of way. All right, it wasn't until the end of the play where she put on this coat with the fur on there, okay, which made her look more feminine.
You know, I suspect that's pretty hard to answer, but does any of the panel want to comment?
You said we could start over there.
I'm wearing a dress. I like to wear high heels. No, what I want to say is you should have, we say this about the family and the society just because you have to have confidence in yourself. And of course, it can be a character. You can find this both in females and males. I was reading recently that we have all this discussion about females and the discrimination, but there are also complaints from males many times that they are discriminated. So I agree with you, at the end it's a matter of personality. But usually we create our personality in the society we are living, with the interactions we are having, and that's the reason I think the whole panel start thinking in these terms. And yeah, she was really unbalanced, as you pointed out. She was struggling with her own nature, and she was really trying to be treated as men. And that's true also for many, many women in academia nowadays. They adapt this male behavior in order to make sure they they are treated equally. But at the end, I can tell you, because I have many exams, I used to work in a group, I'm also trained as a computational biologist, so 23 men, 3 women. And I have heard many comments like, look out, don't break your nails in the... So instead of behave like Dr. Franklin, what I said was like, you're right, it's a new nail polish, I don't want to. But you know, I have this confidence to say, and I think this is the most important thing for women nowadays, and it's a global thing. Gender equality is a global thing, it's not only in science, so I totally agree with you.
Did you want to say anything?
Well, I was going to say, it's reminding me of like when I started graduate school, I decided I wouldn't wear nail polish till after I passed my qualifying exam, because I wanted people to take me seriously. But I also would respond, you know, why can't men be more like women? Because I think that, like, if I sit in a room with 23 men, we're having a conversation, let's say about science or something related, and the men are interrupting each other and constantly trying to prove how much smarter they are than the next guy, and I want to be a nice woman, it's not necessarily going to work out that well. I mean, it's going to be the way I've operated, and it's worked fine for me, but it's tricky. And it becomes much more tricky when you're the only one in the room. It would be much easier to do that if the numbers were more in parity, I think.
I think that's where the nature-nurture distinction, although it's good to kind of frame the whole discussion in a sense, ends up becoming a little bit too limited. Because it's often about opportunities and how one takes advantage of opportunities based on what their experiences are, how they're trained. So even though presenting certain Rosalind Franklin with certain types of opportunities, she's going to act very differently than if the same opportunity was presented to a woman today. Right? Because of some of the training that she's received and what she was told that she could or could not do. So it's about, you know, so this nature-nurture thing is interesting to frame, but at the same point, it's really a give and take that has to happen at a certain level in order to have a successful scientific career.
Over here.
Yes. Do you think it would be beneficial if people that taught science in the school systems had to have a degree in science?
You want to start that one?
Yeah.
So I got rid of this role. Yes, I do, but I think it would also be beneficial if these people had a degree in exciting children about what they're teaching.
Any other comments on that? Yes.
I think that sometimes in these debates there's an unstated expectation that if all discrimination and prejudice and barriers were removed, that the numbers would go to 50-50 in math or science, whatever it is. Now, my academic field is psychology, and it's very often the case that in lab meetings I'm the only male in the room among a number of women graduate students and professors. I also in college took a lot of women's gender studies classes, and I'm very often the only male. So if we were to remove all forms of discrimination, is it the case that the gender studies classes would be half men and half women, and the mathematics classes would be 50% male and 50% female? I think you have to determine what your goal is here. The goal seems to be that any person who has a disposition or desire to enter into some field of study should be able to do so without any sort of inauthentic stumbling block placed in his or her way. But I don't think that we're looking for quotas and calibrations, and that the mere difference in number is in itself evidence of discrimination. It may not be. You have to find evidence actually of these discriminatory practices, whether they're overt or implicit, but mere difference in numbers is not evidence of discrimination, as my own experience in psychology and gender studies shows.
Well, I have a question for you then. What about changes in numbers over the years?
What about changes in numbers over the years?
Does the fact that so many within the last 10
as
years...
barriers are removed, we can show the numbers going up. That's evidence that perhaps there were barriers. Yeah, that's pretty good evidence, but it doesn't identify the ultimate target necessarily.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's not the goal to make things 50-50. The goal is to make people be able to pursue whatever dream they have in a comfortable way.
Other back there?
Hi, I'm wondering if you could tell us about an important mentor in your life and whether you would encourage young women to look for both informal and formal mentoring and working opportunities.
I think that makes more sense coming from you two.
Okay. You know, all my mentors or what I'm doing right now are males. I didn't have a female mentor so far, and
Doesn't work for you for now.
no, but maybe I missed the question then.
No, it was just who was one of your favorite, you know, who was an important mentor to you, and would you encourage young women to look for that? Because I agree they can be men or women, but I'm just wondering, would you share with us?
Mentoring is what you want to do in the future, in a way. I mean, you always meet great people. There's not necessarily that this is higher in a hierarchy on you, or, you know, your boss, or a professor. It can be even a person that you're in the same level and just inspire you. So, mentor, I agree, a person that usually has an experience in the field is easy to guide you, to give you advice about how to do things correct. But I think the most important part is inspiration, and this can come from colleagues, even from a completely different disciplines, not necessarily that is in biology. I have friends that they have pushed me, and I have understand this is what I want to do, and they are not even scientists. And this is another thing, I think, to bring technology or science closer to the society. It's nice when you try to bring your science closer to a global problem, or something that is really linked to the society, and then you get feedback from them, and you can continue your career, and you can decide which is the path you want to follow.
I don't think I have a lot.
I just want to say that as someone who does a lot of teaching, I think one of the most important things that teachers do is to make the world larger in potential for our students who are going to be passing after us. I think this is what a really good mentor does. And sometimes they do that because of the gender that they're at and the position they're at. Sometimes they do it because of an idea they have that can be really inspiring. But for me, that's probably the best thing I could ever do for a student, is to allow them to see a world that's more connected and larger than when they came to study with me.
I just need to jump in. This is going to be our last question. We are going to have, some of the panelists will be out in the rotunda after this, but we do have to clear the theater. There's also tons of information on the panels outside about other female scientists that you can read, so I encourage you to look at that. So we'll take last question.
Over here.
Yeah, early in your comments you talked about the roles of parents, and I'm particularly interested in the comments you would have coach a dad that happened to have a 17-year-old daughter in junior high school. I'm also kind of surprised there aren't more high school girls. I'd be welcome some comments and coaching from them.
Well, I'll tell you a story about how I dealt with my kids when they were growing up. For about 6 or 7 years, I would tell them stories about a mythical science fiction character that had all sorts of adventures, but the kids had to problem solve how to get out of the difficulties that they got into. And what that instilled in my son and my daughter was an enormous confidence in problem solving, and they love science because some of these problems you had to kind of figure out scientific solutions. So getting them engaged and giving them the feeling that they can really do this, I can't urge too strongly how I think important that is. I think expectations really are very determinant in our lives, and those are early expectations that get set as partly our parents, partly our environment, but our parents can make a big, big difference. So getting actively engaged with them, I don't know, 7th grade, that might be a bit old. You might have missed your chance already.
17.
Oh, 17. Oh, way too old. I think just reinforcing they can do what they want to do and helping them think about it.
I have just one quick, I have a daughter, and she's now in high school, she just entered high school. But there was a period in her, she started off being very good in math and science, and then there was a period where all of a sudden she started faltering. And it's right around 6th, 7th grade, right, with certain ways that young women are socialized. And she went to a single-sex school, and she actually was really smart about this whole thing. She said to me, "It's not that I don't want to be with men. I don't want to be with other young women when men are about." Right? And so it was about this. So that gave her this opportunity to get out of one of these potentially toxic environments and to be able to be supported in her math. And now it's her favorite subject again. I mean, it's remarkable.
Well, anyway, I just close by saying I think this was really a remarkable play, and I think we take home things to think about. Thank you very much.